The Gospel according to St. John, the 11th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. This is another really long one, and so you are welcome to sit down. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with her perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sister sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then, after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us now go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." Well, the disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, so that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Well, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this one from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and seen what Jesus did, believed in him. This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. If I had to pick a theme for this Lenten season, the theme would easily be Jesus alone. This entire preaching season for me has been all about what it is that Jesus alone does that makes him worthy of our devotion, of our worship, of our following. We have heard that Jesus is holy and completely other, fully human, yet there is no doubt but that the time we get to this fifth Sunday in Lent, that Jesus is also fully and completely divine, accomplishing in word and deed what we could only begin to imagine. Jesus alone can resist and defeat. I hope you all got that better than the kids did. Temptation and evil. Jesus alone can call us to new life, to be born again of the water and the Spirit. Jesus alone knows everything we have ever done, and yet still loves us. Jesus alone can heal a man who's been blind from birth. Jesus alone can forgive sins and restore us to sight, to one another, to new life. All that we are, all that we have, all we will ever be is because of Jesus. What could possibly be left for Jesus to do? Well, apparently, at least one more thing. So today we find ourselves again faced with a Jesus worthy of our devotion and worship. Worthy certainly for the raising of Lazarus, for nobody else can call someone forth from the dead. Only Jesus is capable of a miracle of that magnitude. But for me, the raising of Lazarus is just a tiny piece of the story. I'd like to focus on that second miracle, the second miracle that takes place and never seems to get any publicity, the miracle of inviting people like us into the work of ministry. I mean, it's one thing for Jesus to heal the sick. It's one thing for Jesus to offer forgiveness. It's one thing for Jesus to open up the gates of heaven to bring in new life. It's quite another thing to invite us to heal the sick, to invite us to offer forgiveness, to invite us to open up the kingdom of heaven, to invite us to bring forth new life. Don't we prefer to watch Jesus work? Don't we like having these ringside seats to the main attraction? I do. Being invited into the work? Well, that's just silliness. We're not qualified. We're not competent. We're not ready. Are we? But Jesus thinks that we are. Jesus, as he's about to raise Lazarus, he commands a huge audience. And I don't think it's because he wants a lot of applause. I think it's because Jesus has something for everyone to do. Yes, Jesus alone restores Lazarus to life. Jesus calls him forth from the tomb, but on the way, he's gathering up the crowd that's going to come with him. He brings along the disciples. Then the sisters are wrapped up in the gathering. He brings along the mourners. Then there's the crowd that's been following. This far, Jesus has been keeping a pretty low profile in Lent. He's been keeping a pretty low profile. I mean, only he and the devil were there for the temptation. Only Nicodemus was there that dark night. Only the woman had that conversation with him at the well. Only the blind man was privy to exactly what Jesus did to restore his sight. Only by them telling and by word of mouth did those stories grow and others were called into the reality of Jesus. But this time, Jesus is like the Pied Piper, compelling others, compelling us to join him at the entrance to the tomb. Because it's time, Jesus says, for others to jump in to the work of the kingdom. We can't just keep following along, buying a popcorn or a hot dog or a soda and settling back to passively be part of the story of salvation. When Lazarus is struggling to stand on his own 2 feet, bound by yards and yards of cloth, confining every movement, Jesus turns around and looks at everyone who's gathered together that day. The disciples, the sisters, the mourners, the Pharisees, the crowd, and he says, now you get to work. I brought him back. Now you get him and give him a life worth living. Jesus says, remove the trappings of death from your friend. Turn him loose to work along beside you. Turn him loose to live among you. Turn him loose, learn from him. That's a real miracle. Jesus inviting the disciples into the work of the kingdom. The disciples, those 12 who a page turn ago had no idea where they were going and figured, well, they just might as well tromp along to die. And Jesus invites the sisters, the one who yelled at him, you're too blasted late, my brother's already dead. And the one who was so inconsolable, she just stayed at home. Jesus invites them into the work of restoring life. The mourners, the ones whose lives, whose livelihoods are made by dwelling in the certainty of death, Jesus invites them into the work of celebrating new life. And the crowds who just want a free show, he invites them into full participation in the kingdom of God. Jesus invites us. Jesus invites us into continuing the work of the kingdom in the here and the now. For life with Jesus, life in the kingdom, is not something that starts after we die. It begins right now as we participate in removing the trappings of death from our communities and our institutions. You know, it would have been a lot easier if Jesus would have just walked up to that tomb, twirled Lazarus right out of those grave clothes and sent everybody home to ooh and ah as they had their milk and cookies that evening. But no, Jesus himself walked away, left Lazarus bound, and invited the gawkers, the onlookers, the busybodies, and the do-gooders to do something, to heal, to restore, to forgive, to bring life. We stand here at the tomb this week, looking out on a world that is bound and trapped and wrapped tightly by all the trappings of sin and death. And Jesus is inviting us to do something healing, something restorative, something forgiving, something life-giving. Do we just talk about it? Or are we going to go out there and do something?